Welcome back to DBC. Today we are continuing with nonviolent communication. Last time we spoke about the four processes or steps of nonviolent communication, which are observing, stating feelings, stating the needs that cause those feelings, and then making a request. Today we're going to cover just the first two steps in a little bit of detail. So that corresponds to chapter 3 and 4. Let's start with chapter 3, which is called Observing Without Evaluating. And he begins the chapter with a quote from an Indian philosopher. It says that observing without evaluating is the highest form of human intelligence. There we go. And so while we're working on observing and separating observations from just stating the concrete things that we actually observe, we want to keep in mind not only what's spoken, but what we are communicating non-verbally, whether that's like through eye rolls or looking away or body language and stuff, so that there's multiple layers of communication. I want to give you a few examples of observations that are actually evaluations. So for example, the statement, it can be even positive. So for example, you are too generous is an assessment, not really an observation. You don't observe generosity. Again, I mentioned this metaphor of a security camera. Does a security camera observe generosity? No. So a better example would say, when I see you give all of your lunch money to other people, I think you are being too generous. So when I see, and then there's still an assessment at the end, but you could just say, I see you give a lot of your lunch money to other people or all your lunch money. Next one could be that Doug procrastinates. So you don't ever, a camera cannot observe procrastination. A camera could observe the following. Doug only studies for exams the night before of the exam. Immigrants don't take care of their property. Versus, I have not seen the immigrant family living at 1679 Ross Street shovel their snow on their sidewalk this winter. Another one is, you seldom do what I want. So ask yourself, it's kind of a check. Could a security camera capture that? No. The last 3 times I initiated an activity, you said you didn't want to do it. So the key here is to avoid vague terms, like such as the word seldom, because this will help us to provoke more compassion and less defensiveness. And Rosenberg doesn't specifically say this, but I think the idea here is to focus on specifics in our observations versus vague words like frequently or seldom, and think of the difference of saying a specific something versus saying the dreaded you always or you never do X, Y, or Z. And because the idea here, I believe, is that if we take a specific instance with a time and a date and an action that's specifically observable, that either happened or it didn't. It's a statement of fact. And if the other person was there, if they're lying, that's a different discussion. But as long as we're agreeing on the facts, there's not really defensiveness to facts. There might be excuses, and we're going to talk about that later in later videos. But this idea that let's just observe and, again, think of that. Could a camera see exactly those words that you said? Excellent. Next step is we're going to transition to chapter 4, which is identifying and expressing our feelings. So Rosenberg at the beginning of the chapter brings a metaphor of music. He talks about, think of like a classically trained musician and how much tone and nuance they can get out of music and notes and what they can hear and produce as well, versus someone who can just blow into a kazoo. And that's what we want to train ourselves to be more like the classically trained musician when it comes to being able to identify and express our feelings. And just as a side note before hopping in is that it turns out, according to Rosenberg, that expressing vulnerabilities to adversaries or the people that we're talking with in these situations can actually help to resolve conflict, because it sort of lowers a barrier and it establishes vulnerability, and so feelings, it's a much better way to proceed. And so Rosenberg mentions that there's confusion created by the English language. I would update that to say that it is our imprecise use of the English language which causes confusion, which it definitely does. For example, we're talking about feelings. So he says as a warning, red flag should go off whenever we hear the following words. I feel that. So when there's that there, it's always going to be an opinion, not an actual feeling. So in addition, there's a bunch of things. Watch out when the word feel is followed by first category. So that, like, or as if. So I feel like you should know better. Okay, not a feeling, right? You might think that. I think that you should feel better. You should know better, sorry. Or I feel like a failure. Not a feeling again. I feel sad or depressed or unworthy. Those are feelings, but you don't feel like a failure. You think you're a failure. I feel as if I am living with a wall. This is with a relationship example that he gives. You might feel disconnected. So another section or another set of words that to watch out for when they come after the word feel would be pronouns. So I, you, he, she, they, it. I feel I am constantly on call at work. You might feel restrained with your time or pressured, but you don't feel I am constantly on call. I feel it is useless. You might say I feel despair or I feel hopeless. Names and nouns referring to other people. I feel Amy has been pretty responsible. You don't actually feel that. You can say Amy has been pretty responsible, but again, it's a different sort of observation. I feel my boss is being manipulative. Conversely, we can also express feelings sort of the opposite, like an actual feeling without using the word feel. So I'm feeling irritated. It could also be just I'm irritated, and that's a legitimate statement of feeling. And a few things talking about feelings that aren't actually feelings. A lot of times he says that feelings, when we think we're expressing feelings, we're actually expressing what we think we are. So for example, I feel inadequate as a guitar player. This is an assessment of our guitar playing skills, not an actual feeling, versus I feel disappointed in myself as a guitar player. I feel impatient with myself as a guitar player. I feel frustrated with myself as a guitar player. So feelings versus what we think we are assessments of ourselves. Feelings versus how we think others are evaluating us. And this is a big one when it comes to being compassionate or violent in our communication. I feel unimportant to the people I work with. You could say better, I think that I'm unimportant to the people I work with. So, but again, we're evaluating their thoughts of us. We're evaluating their evaluation of us in our own head. I feel sad instead, or I feel disappointed. I feel misunderstood. So again, misunderstood here is an assessment of someone else's understanding of us, not an actual feeling. I can feel anxious, I can feel annoyed, but I don't feel misunderstood. I think they misunderstand me is a different sentence there. So I feel ignored. Again, this is an assessment of someone else's actions. I feel hurt is a better statement of feeling. And so again, words like ignored, they express our own interpretation of others and their behavior as opposed to an actual feeling that we're having. Other examples include a ton of negative ones here. So abandoned, abused, attached, betrayed, bullied, cheated, diminished, let down, manipulated, pressured, put down, rejected, taken for granted, and used. The goal here is to build a vocabulary for feelings, so to enrich in our vocabulary or our musical ability. Go back to the metaphor from the beginning of the chapter. Let's use words that refer to a specific emotion Rosenberg wants to move us towards, rather than words that are vague or general. So instead of good, I feel happy, I feel excited, I feel relieved. And he has this massive list of feeling words. And look at this is not even the whole thing. Tons. There's like probably 150 and then maybe up to 200 feeling words, which is funny because usually we're taught that there's only 5 feelings, but he wants us to enrich our feelings vocabulary. And why? So that we can clearly and specifically name and identify our emotions. And why do that? So that we can connect more easily with one another and be more compassionate. So the idea here is let's express feelings, not thoughts, assessments, or interpretations. And again, so back to the third chapter is to observe without assessing. So the kind of the key there, the question to ask yourself is, could a security camera also observe what I'm observing? Or am I making an assessment of what I observed? And then in this chapter, I guess the key question would be like, am I actually feeling what I say I'm feeling? Or is it an assessment of my own actions or someone else's actions? Or would it be better to say, instead of I feel whatever, I think this is going on? Or is it interpreting someone else's behavior? And I usually save the criticism for the end, but I wanted to bring one thing up here. And I feel like it's tough. I wonder how there's a nonviolent way to sort of engage in this process with someone who, let's say, has never heard of it before. So, for example, if someone says to you, I'm feeling neglected by you. So, according to this, they're not actually feeling neglected. But there's obviously some truth to a hurt or some need is not being met for them to make that sentence, even though it's not correct, according to Rosenberg here. So I'm wondering if, in response, if someone says, I'm feeling neglected, we could pivot by saying, and what does that feel like? As a way to get them to draw maybe one of these feeling words isolated or alone or let down. So that's for today. Next time we're going to talk about the rest of the 4 steps, which will be moving from our feelings to identifying the needs and expressing the needs that are causing those feelings, and then making requests to others. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.